In this lesson, we'll take a look at the variant data type, which can be used to store any kind of data type. In fact, a variable that's declared as a variant can store a number and then be assigned a Boolean and then be assigned a string, and no errors will be raised by the program. A variant is sort of like a chameleon. It can morph into whatever data type is needed by the program. A variant is also the default data type for all variables that we declare without a specific type. So it's what VBA relies on to be able to gain versatility and flexibility with a variable that the user has not explicitly defined to have a data type. As it turns out, we can also explicitly tell VBA that we want a variable to serve as a variant data type. A common question that people have is, if variant is so flexible, why not just use it all the time for every single variable? There's two reasons why we want to avoid this. The first is memory allocation. So when we have this flexibility and this dynamic nature to a variable, behind the scenes, VBA needs to take up more memory to represent this data type that can basically be anything. Now, some VBA developers say, again, in today's day and age, with the speed of computers, that memory usage isn't really a big concern. With that said, even if that's true, we want to get into the practice of establishing these best practices and these good habits. The more that we explicitly use the kind of data type that we want for a program, for example, saying that a variable will be explicitly an integer or a long instead of a variant, the more that we kind of makes logical sense in our brain how the program is designed to work. The program becomes structured a little bit better and a lot easier to understand and debug, especially if you can imagine another programmer reading your code. If every single variable that we declare is just a variant, how are they to know exactly what each variable is supposed to represent? In comparison, if we tell them that something is a long, they intuitively have a sense that the variable is going to be storing some kind of number, so some kind of numeric representation. So a variant makes the program less logical and more difficult to debug later. So it shouldn't be used just kind of haphazardly whenever you want to, but it does have certain use cases. For example, whenever there is uncertainty about the data that is being stored in a variable. For example, you might ask the user for input, but you might not be sure how the user is going to give you that value. They may enter a number, they may enter a string, they may enter something else, and whenever you want a data type that is flexible enough to adjust to any kind of uncertainty, that's what variant is perfect for. Let's go ahead and define a procedure here in my Visual Basic Editor. I'm going to call it chameleon. And what I'm going to do here is just define a variable or declare a variable called a. And a is going to be a variant. Now, as we know by now, if we don't give a variable a data type, if we leave out the as keyword, VBA is going to assume that the variable is going to be a variant. So this is enough, but let's go ahead and be explicit here by writing as and writing the actual variant keyword just like we would for any other data type. So a now is variant. It can store anything we want. So for example, I can assign a Boolean value to a. And what I'm actually going to do below here is I'm going to use debug print, and I'm going to rely on a method we talked about a little bit earlier called typename. Typename is a built-in method or function that accepts some kind of variable, and it's going to tell us what data type that variable is currently. So I'm just going to give it a, and if we execute this procedure right now with F5, we can see in our immediate window that right now a is being represented as a Boolean. Notice that we declared a right here as a variant, but variant is a flexible data type that can adjust to whatever we need it to be. So right now at this stage where a is equal to true, variant has evolved or morphed into a Boolean data type. Let's continue this process and assign something different to a. Let's now assign a long or an integer, let's say the number 5. If I repeat the exact same process, and I ask for what the data type is of a at that juncture, if we execute this now, we're going to see a totally different value. We can see that now the variant has morphed from a Boolean to an integer. So it's dynamically adapting, almost like a chameleon, to store whatever is needed. If I continue this logic onwards, let's say I change it to something like a floating point number, like pi 3.14. Let's just debug print that. And right below here, let's go ahead as well and give it an actual string value like hello. And once again, debug print type name, give it the value of my variable. We're going to see 4 completely different values here when I execute with F5, Boolean, integer, double string. So that's the whole point of a variant. It can adapt dynamically, flexibly to whatever we need it to store. Again, this isn't something that you should use all the time. It's a lot of power to behold, and you might be tempted to say, okay, this is great. I don't have to worry about thinking about what it is that I'm actually going to be working with in my program. However, as I mentioned, that's not a best practice for developers. You do want to think about what each variable is going to be storing. You need to think about whether a variable is necessary in your program. You need to think about how its value is actually going to be calculated. So variant is sort of like a little bit of a cheat tool. It seems like it makes things easier, but it really burdens you and makes it more difficult for you to become a better developer and actually have to more critically assess how your program is going to run. So avoid using this data type unless it's necessary, unless you can think of a situation where you're not actually going to know what a variable is going to store. And in that case, when you need that level of flexibility and versatility, at that point you can stick with an actual variant data type.